The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his ceremonial uniform for the 100th time. His black mare, Duchess, stood perfectly still beside him, her breathing steady and controlled. After 15 years serving in the Queen's Guard, James knew the routine by heart. Every movement had to be precise, every gesture calculated. There was no room for emotion or spontaneity when you were protecting the crown. Duchess had been his partner for 3 years now. She was a magnificent animal, standing 16 hands high with a coat so black it seemed to absorb light. Her training was impeccable. She could stand motionless for hours, ignore loud noises, crowds, and even aggressive protesters. Nothing fazed her. That was exactly what made her perfect for royal duty. The other guards often joked that Duchess was more disciplined than some of the human soldiers. She never flinched when tourists tried to pet her, never moved when cameras flashed in her face, and certainly never broke formation during ceremonies. James took pride in her perfect behavior, but sometimes he wondered what thoughts ran through her intelligent dark eyes. On this particular Tuesday morning, something felt different. James couldn't put his finger on it, but there was an energy in the air that made both him and Duchess slightly more alert than usual. The morning briefing had been routine, standard patrol duties around the palace grounds, photo opportunities with tourists, and the usual crowd control. As they took their position outside the main gates, James noticed an unusual gathering forming across the street. It wasn't the typical cluster of tourists with their cameras and guidebooks. This group seemed more subdued, more purposeful. An elderly woman sat on a small folding chair, surrounded by what appeared to be family members. She looked frail and tired, her thin hands clutching a small bouquet of flowers. The woman's granddaughter, a girl of about 12 with worried eyes, kept glancing toward the palace gates. James had seen thousands of visitors over the years, but something about this family struck him as different. They weren't here for the usual tourist experience. There was something deeper, more personal in their presence. Throughout the morning, James found his attention drawn back to the elderly woman. She barely moved from her chair, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. The family members took turns sitting beside her, offering water and gentle words. It was clear they were waiting for something, though James couldn't imagine what. During his brief rest period, James overheard 2 of his colleagues discussing the family. Apparently, the elderly woman was a former palace employee who had worked in the kitchens for over 40 years. She had served 3 different monarchs and had recently been diagnosed with a serious illness. Her family had brought her here hoping to catch a glimpse of the palace where she had spent most of her working life. When James returned to his post, he found Duchess behaving strangely. The normally stoic mare kept turning her head toward the family, her ears pricked forward with interest. It was subtle enough that casual observers wouldn't notice, but James knew his horse well enough to recognize when something had captured her attention. The afternoon wore on, and the elderly woman remained in her chair. She seemed to be growing weaker, her family becoming increasingly concerned. James watched as they discussed something in hushed tones, clearly debating whether to leave. The woman shook her head firmly, indicating her desire to stay longer. As the day shift prepared to end, James felt a strange reluctance to leave his post. Duchess, too, seemed unwilling to move away from their position. The mare's behavior was becoming more noticeable now. She would take a step or 2 toward the family, then catch herself and return to position. It was as if she was fighting against her training, some deeper instinct urging her to act. The sun was beginning to set when James made a decision that would change everything. Instead of following protocol and returning to the stables with the changing of the guard, he remained at his post for a few extra minutes. He told himself he was just ensuring a smooth transition, but deep down he knew he was staying because of the elderly woman and her family. Duchess seemed to sense his decision. The great mare stood even taller, her attention focused entirely on the family across the street. For the first time in 3 years of service together, James felt as though his horse was about to surprise him. The rigid discipline that defined their daily routine suddenly felt less important than the human drama unfolding before them. The elderly woman's granddaughter approached the palace gates one more time, her young face etched with disappointment. It was clear the family had hoped for some kind of acknowledgement, some small moment of recognition for the woman's decades of faithful service. But palace protocol was strict. and guards were not permitted to interact with visitors beyond basic crowd control. As James watched the family prepare to leave, he felt Duchess shift beneath him. The mare's muscles tensed and her breathing changed subtly. After years of perfect obedience, something was stirring in the noble animal's heart. The stage was set for an unprecedented moment that would challenge everything James thought he knew about duty, protocol, and the surprising capacity for compassion that existed even in the most disciplined circumstances. What happened next defied everything James thought he knew about his horse. Without any command or signal from him, Duchess began walking slowly toward the palace gates where the family stood. Her movement was deliberate and gentle, completely different from her usual military precision. James felt his heart racing as he realized his perfectly trained mount was breaking protocol entirely on her own. The elderly woman's granddaughter was the first to notice the approaching horse and rider. Her eyes widened with a mixture of surprise and wonder as the magnificent black mare came closer. The rest of the family turned to look, their conversations falling silent as they watched this unprecedented scene unfold. James knew he should pull back on the reins, return to position, and maintain the strict boundaries that separated the guards from the public. Every instinct from his 15 years of service screamed at him to correct his horse's behavior immediately. But something deeper held him back. Duchess moved with such purpose, such gentle determination, that he found himself allowing her to continue. The elderly woman struggled to rise from her chair as the horse approached. Her family members reached out to steady her, but she waved them away with surprising strength. Her eyes, which had been dim with illness and fatigue all day, suddenly sparkled with life. She had worked around the royal horses for decades in her kitchen duties, often seeing them from the palace windows, but she had never been this close to one of the magnificent guard horses. Duchess stopped just a few feet away from the metal barriers that separated the public from the palace grounds. The mare's behavior was extraordinary. She lowered her great head and extended her neck toward the elderly woman as if offering a greeting. Her dark eyes were soft and intelligent, completely focused on the frail figure before her. James sat frozen in his saddle, acutely aware that other guards and palace staff were beginning to notice the unusual interaction. He could see his commanding officer approaching from across the courtyard, his expression stern and questioning. In mere moments, James would likely face serious disciplinary action for allowing his horse to break formation and engage with civilians. But the elderly woman's face transformed the moment. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks as she reached out with a trembling hand toward Duchess. The mare remained perfectly still, allowing the gentle touch on her velvet nose. It was as if the horse understood that this moment was precious and fragile, requiring all her considerable grace and patience. The woman's granddaughter whispered something to her grandmother, and the elderly lady nodded through her tears. In a voice barely audible but filled with emotion, she spoke to the horse as if greeting an old friend. She told Duchess about her years working in the palace, about watching the guard horses from the kitchen windows, about always dreaming of meeting one of these magnificent animals up close. Other tourists and passers-by began to notice the unusual scene. Cameras appeared and a small crowd started to gather. James felt the weight of attention and knew that within minutes, this moment would either become a beautiful memory or a career-ending mistake. The rigid world of royal protocol didn't typically allow for spontaneous acts of kindness, no matter how pure the intention. Duchess seemed oblivious to the growing attention around them. Her entire focus remained on the elderly woman before her. The mare's breathing was slow and steady, her posture relaxed yet dignified. She had transformed from a ceremonial guard horse into something else entirely, an ambassador of compassion, bridging the gap between the formal world of royal duty and simple human connection. The woman's son stepped forward, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. He explained quietly to James that his mother had been hoping for years to see the guard horses up close. Her illness had progressed rapidly, and this might be her last opportunity to visit the palace where she had spent so much of her life in service. James felt a lump forming in his throat as he listened. The commanding officer was now close enough that James could see his expression clearly. It was a mixture of concern, confusion, and something that might have been curiosity. The moment balanced on a knife's edge between disaster and something beautiful beyond protocol. The elderly woman continued to stroke Duchess's nose, speaking in gentle tones about her memories of the palace. She recalled the early morning deliveries when she would catch glimpses of the horses being exercised in the courtyard. She remembered the sound of their hooves on cobblestones during state ceremonies. She had always wondered what it would feel like to touch one of these noble animals. Duchess responded to the woman's voice and touch with remarkable sensitivity. The mare's eyes half closed in contentment, and she made soft, nickering sounds deep in her throat. It was as if she understood the significance of this encounter and was determined to make it as meaningful as possible for the elderly woman. The crowd around them had grown larger, but it remained respectful and quiet. Even the usually chattering tourists seemed to sense that they were witnessing something special. Phones and cameras captured the moment, but there was an almost reverent quality to the way people observed the interaction between the proud guard horse and the frail elderly woman. James made a decision that would define the rest of this extraordinary encounter. Instead of ending the interaction and returning to strict protocol, he chose to trust in Duchess's instincts and allow the moment to continue unfolding naturally. He had never seen his horse behave with such gentle purpose, and he realized that perhaps there were lessons about service and compassion that went beyond military training and royal regulations. The commanding officer, Major Harrison, reached the scene just as the most remarkable thing happened. The elderly woman, still stroking Duchess's nose, began to hum a melody that James didn't recognize. It was soft and sweet, a tune that seemed to come from deep in her memory. The effect on Duchess was immediate and profound. The mare's ears perked forward, and she moved even closer to the barriers as if drawn by the familiar sound. Major Harrison stopped in his tracks, his prepared reprimand dying on his lips as he witnessed something he had never seen in 25 years of military service. The horse was responding to the elderly woman not just with tolerance but with genuine affection and recognition. Duchess began to make gentle, whinnying sounds, almost as if she were humming along with the woman's melody. The woman's daughter stepped forward and explained the significance of the tune. It was an old palace staff song, something the kitchen workers used to sing during long shifts. Her mother had hummed it every day while preparing meals for the royal household. Somehow, impossibly, Duchess seemed to recognize it. Perhaps she had heard it echoing through the palace corridors during her own training. Or maybe horses possessed a deeper understanding of human emotion than anyone had imagined. James felt tears pricking his own eyes as he watched the profound connection unfolding below him. The elderly woman's face had transformed completely. The pain and weariness that had marked her features all day had been replaced by pure joy. She looked decades younger as she continued her gentle conversation with Duchess, sharing stories of her service and expressing her gratitude for this unexpected encounter. Major Harrison found himself in an unprecedented situation. By all regulations, he should order James to return to position immediately. The interaction had already lasted far longer than any protocol would permit. Yet as he watched the elderly woman's face light up with happiness, as he saw the genuine compassion in Duchess's behavior, he found himself unable to intervene. Other members of the guard had gathered at a respectful distance, equally mesmerized by the unusual scene. Sergeant Collins, a veteran with 12 years of service, whispered to his colleague that he had never seen a guard horse behave with such deliberate kindness. The animals were trained to be steady and reliable, but this level of emotional intelligence and compassion was extraordinary. The elderly woman's granddaughter had been taking photos with her phone, but she put it away to focus entirely on her grandmother's happiness. The 12-year-old girl understood that she was witnessing something magical, a moment that would become a treasured family story for generations. Her grandmother's illness had brought so much sadness to their family, but this unexpected gift from a royal guard horse was creating a memory of pure joy. Duchess continued to amaze everyone with her behavior. The mare began to gently nuzzle the woman's shoulder, careful to avoid any movement that might knock her off balance. It was as if the horse understood the elderly woman's frailty and was adjusting her interactions accordingly. The level of awareness and empathy displayed was remarkable, even for an animal known for intelligence and sensitivity. A small group of palace staff had emerged from the building, drawn by reports of the unusual interaction. Among them was Mrs. Catherine Wells, the head of kitchen staff, who had worked alongside the elderly woman for many years before the woman's retirement. Mrs. Wells recognized her former colleague immediately and approached with tears in her eyes. The reunion between the two women added Another layer of emotion to the already extraordinary scene. Mrs. Wells explained to the gathering crowd that the elderly woman, Margaret Thompson, had been beloved by everyone who worked in the palace. She had served with dedication and kindness for over 40 years, always arriving early and staying late, always ready with a kind word or a helping hand for newer staff members. Margaret's voice grew stronger as she spoke with her old colleague and continued to interact with Duchess. The horse's presence seemed to energize her in a way that nothing else had for months. She told Mrs. Wells about her illness, about how she had wanted to see the palace one more time, and about how she never dreamed she would have such a close encounter with one of the magnificent guard horses. Duchess seemed to understand that she was the center of attention, but rather than becoming nervous or skittish as horses often do in crowds, she remained calm and focused on Margaret. The mare's breathing was steady and relaxed, her posture dignified yet approachable. She had somehow transformed from a symbol of rigid military discipline into an ambassador of warmth and compassion. Major Harrison made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of ending the interaction, he quietly instructed the other guards to maintain a respectful perimeter around the scene. He recognized that something special was happening, something that transcended normal protocol and spoke to deeper values of service and human connection. Sometimes he realized the most important duty was simply to allow kindness to flourish. The afternoon sun cast a golden light over the scene as Margaret continued her conversation with Duchess. The horse listened attentively, occasionally making soft sounds of acknowledgement. Other members of Margaret's family shared stories of her service, painting a picture of a woman whose life had been dedicated to caring for others, even in the most humble of roles. James remained mounted on Duchess, marveling at his horse's behavior and feeling proud of her compassionate response. He realized that all their training in discipline and obedience had not eliminated the mare's natural capacity for empathy. It had simply refined it, allowing her to express kindness with grace and dignity. This was service at its highest level, not just following orders but responding to genuine human need with wisdom and compassion. As word spread throughout the palace, more staff members began to appear. The head groom, Thomas Fletcher, emerged from the royal mews with curiosity written across his weathered face. He had trained Duchess from a young foal and thought he knew everything about her temperament and behavior. What he witnessed now challenged everything he believed about the carefully controlled nature of the guard horses. Fletcher approached slowly, not wanting to disturb the extraordinary interaction taking place. He watched as Duchess continued to respond to Margaret with unprecedented gentleness. The mare was displaying behaviors he had never seen before. A soft whicker of comfort when Margaret coughed, a subtle shift of position to provide better access when the elderly woman wanted to stroke her neck, and most remarkably, a patient stillness that seemed to emanate peace and comfort. Margaret's son, David, stood beside his mother with tears streaming down his face. He had been preparing himself for months to say goodbye to the woman who had raised him with such love and dedication. Watching her face light up with joy as she interacted with Duchess was giving him a gift he never expected, the chance to see his mother happy and vibrant one more time. The crowd that had gathered was remarkably respectful. Even the tourists seemed to understand that they were witnessing something sacred. Cameras clicked softly, but people spoke in whispers and maintained a reverent distance. Children in the crowd watched with wide eyes, instinctively understanding that the big black horse was doing something very special for the elderly lady. Mrs. Wells shared more stories about Margaret's time at the palace. She told everyone how Margaret had been the first to arrive each morning, how she had trained dozens of new kitchen staff over the years, and how she had always found ways to make special treats for palace events. Margaret had been the kind of employee who made everyone around her feel valued and cared for. And now she was receiving that same kindness in return from an unexpected source. Duchess began to do something even more remarkable. The mare started to gently lip at Margaret's bouquet of flowers, which she still clutched in her free hand. Instead of trying to eat them, Duchess simply touched them delicately with her soft muzzle as if she understood their significance. Margaret laughed through her tears and offered one of the flowers to the horse, who accepted it with the same gentle grace she had shown throughout the entire encounter. James felt a profound shift in his understanding of duty and service. For years, he had defined his role in terms of rigid discipline and unwavering adherence to protocol, but watching Duchess respond to genuine human need with such wisdom and Compassion was teaching him that true service sometimes meant knowing when rules needed to bend. In the face of something more important, major, Harrison found himself facing an impossible decision. The interaction had now lasted over 30 minutes, far beyond anything that could be explained or justified by normal standards. Yet he was also aware that news crews might arrive at any moment, and the palace would need to manage the public relations aspect of this unprecedented event. He made quiet phone calls to his superiors, explaining the situation and requesting guidance. Meanwhile, Duchess seemed completely unconcerned with the attention and potential consequences of her behavior. Her entire focus remained on Margaret, as if she had appointed herself as the elderly woman's personal guardian for this special moment. The mayor's eyes never left Margaret's face, and she responded to every word and gesture with remarkable attentiveness. Margaret's granddaughter, Emma, worked up the courage to approach the horse herself. Duchess welcomed the young girl with the same gentle kindness she had shown her grandmother, allowing Emma to stroke her neck and whisper her own thanks. The 12-year-old girl told Duchess how worried the family had been about her grandmother, and how this moment was the first time she had seen her truly happy in months. The palace photographer, who had been summoned by Major Harrison, arrived to document the encounter. But rather than treating it as a routine photo opportunity, he approached with the sensitivity of someone capturing a sacred moment. His images would later become some of the most beloved photographs in the palace archives, showing the power of compassion to transcend all boundaries and protocols. Thomas Fletcher, still amazed by his horse's behavior, began to share his own insights about Duchess. He revealed that the mare had always been exceptionally intelligent and sensitive, traits that made her perfect for guard duty, but also gave her an unusual ability to read human emotions. He had seen her comfort nervous young riders during training and respond protectively to anyone who seemed distressed in her presence. Margaret's strength seemed to be returning as the encounter continued. Her voice grew clearer as she spoke with Duchess, sharing memories of her years at the palace and expressing her amazement at this unexpected gift. She told the horse about her grandchildren, about her hopes that they would grow up to serve others as she had done, and about how this moment would be a treasure she would carry with her always. The late afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows across the palace courtyard, but no one seemed eager to end this remarkable encounter. Duchess remained patient and attentive, as if she understood that this was exactly where she needed to be for as long as Margaret needed her. The mayor's behavior had transformed what could have been a routine day of ceremonial duty into something far more meaningful, a demonstration of the deepest values that true service represented. The palace press secretary arrived just as the most touching moment of all unfolded. Margaret, who had been growing tired from the excitement and emotion, began to sway slightly on her feet. Before anyone could react, Duchess stepped closer to the barrier and positioned herself so that Margaret could lean against the sturdy gate for support. The mare then lowered her great head and rested it gently near Margaret's shoulder, offering both physical and emotional comfort. The press secretary, who had come prepared to manage what she expected to be a protocol violation, found herself speechless at the scene before her. She had worked at the palace for over a decade and had never witnessed such a pure demonstration of the values that the royal household was meant to represent: service, compassion, and genuine care for others regardless of their station in life. News of the extraordinary encounter had begun to spread through social media, as several witnesses had shared photos and videos of the interaction. But rather than creating a scandal about broken protocol, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Comments poured in from around the world, praising both Duchess's remarkable behavior and the guard's decision to allow the encounter to continue. Margaret's family received word that other former palace staff members were beginning to arrive, having heard about the reunion through the palace staff network. Mrs. Elizabeth Harper, who had worked in the laundry for 30 years, came with her daughter. Mr. Robert Stevens, a former groundskeeper, arrived with flowers from his garden. Within an hour, a small gathering of Margaret's former colleagues had assembled to support their beloved friend. James found himself at the center of a moment that would define his entire career. Every instinct from his military training told him to return to standard protocol, but every fiber of his being as a human being told him that what was happening was right and necessary. He made the conscious decision to trust Duchess's wisdom and continue supporting her compassionate response to Margaret's needs. The other guard horses, stationed at various points around the palace, seemed to sense that something unusual was happening. Several of them had turned their attention toward the gathering, their ears pricked forward with interest. It was as if the entire royal stables were aware that one of their number was engaged in something beyond normal duty. Margaret's doctor, who had been contacted by her worried family earlier in the day, arrived to check on her condition. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was amazed to find her patient looking better than she had in months. Margaret's color had improved, her breathing was stronger, and her eyes sparkled with life. The doctor quietly observed the interaction between Margaret and Duchess, professionally fascinated by the obvious therapeutic effect the encounter was having. Duchess continued to demonstrate remarkable emotional intelligence throughout the extended encounter. When Margaret grew tired, the mare stood perfectly still to provide a steady presence. When Margaret became excited while sharing a story, Duchess responded with gentle sounds of encouragement. The horse seemed to instinctively know exactly what Margaret needed in each moment. The palace head of security arrived to assess the situation, but like everyone else found himself moved by what he witnessed. Captain Reynolds had been responsible for royal security for 15 years and had never seen a potential security situation transform into something so positive and meaningful. He made the decision to discreetly increase security around the perimeter while allowing the encounter to continue uninterrupted. Emma, Margaret's granddaughter, had been sketching the scene in a small notebook she always carried. Her artistic eye captured details that the cameras missed, the gentle expression in Duchess's eyes, the way Margaret's whole body seemed to relax in the horse's presence, the respectful attention of the growing crowd. Her drawings would later become treasured family heirlooms, preserving the emotional essence of this magical afternoon. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the palace courtyard, Margaret made a request that surprised everyone. She asked if she might sing one more song for Duchess, not the kitchen staff melody from earlier, but a lullaby she used to sing to her own children and grandchildren. Her voice, though weakened by illness, carried clearly in the evening air. Duchess's response to the lullaby was extraordinary. The great mare closed her eyes and swayed gently from side to side as if being rocked by the melody. Other horses could be heard nickering softly in the distance, creating a chorus that seemed to embrace Margaret's song. Even the most protocol-minded palace staff found themselves deeply moved by the scene. Major Harrison received word from his superiors that the palace had decided to officially acknowledge the encounter. Rather than treating it as a breach of protocol, they would celebrate it as an example of the compassion and humanity that should define service to the crown. The decision reflected an understanding that sometimes the most important rules were those written in the heart rather than in official manuals. Thomas Fletcher approached James with news that would make this day even more meaningful. He revealed that Duchess had been born on the palace grounds, and her mother had been one of the horses that Margaret would have seen from the kitchen windows during her years of service. In a way that seemed beyond coincidence, the connection between Margaret and Duchess ran deeper than anyone had imagined. The elderly woman's strength was beginning to fade as the evening approached, but her spirits remained high. She had received the gift of a lifetime, not just the encounter with Duchess, but the outpouring of love and support from her former colleagues and the recognition that her years of faithful service had not been forgotten. The royal guard horse had given her something beyond price, a moment of pure joy in the face of difficult circumstances. As the evening grew late and Margaret's energy began to fade, it became clear that this extraordinary encounter would need to come to an end. But Duchess seemed reluctant to leave her new friend. The mare had positioned herself as close to the barriers as possible and showed no inclination to move away from Margaret's side. James felt the weight of the moment as he prepared to guide Duchess back to the stables. This had been unlike anything he had ever experienced in his years of service. His horse had taught him something profound about the true meaning of duty. That sometimes the most important service comes not from following rules, but from responding to the deeper needs of the human heart. Margaret's family gathered around her one final time as she prepared to say goodbye to Duchess. The elderly woman's hands trembled as she reached out to stroke the mare's nose one last time. Through her tears, she whispered words of gratitude not just to the horse, but to James and all the palace staff who had allowed this magical encounter to unfold. The press secretary had been quietly coordinating with news outlets throughout the afternoon, and she approached Margaret's family with an unexpected request. The palace wanted to formally recognize Margaret's years of service with a special commendation, something that had never been done for kitchen staff before. The encounter with Duchess had reminded everyone that true service comes in many forms, and Margaret's decades of faithful work deserved acknowledgement. Dr. Mitchell checked Margaret's vital signs one more time and was amazed by what she found. The elderly woman's blood pressure had stabilized. Her breathing was easier, and she seemed to have more energy than she had shown in weeks. The therapeutic effect of her time with Duchess had been remarkable, providing a type of healing that no medicine could offer. As James finally began to guide Duchess away from the barriers, the mare did something that would be remembered forever. She turned back toward Margaret and let out a long, gentle whinny, not the sharp call of a military horse, but the soft sound of farewell between friends. Margaret responded by raising her hand in a small wave, tears streaming down her face but her smile radiant. The crowd that had gathered throughout the afternoon began to disperse, but many lingered to speak with Margaret and her family. Former palace colleagues shared memories and promised to stay in touch. Tourists who had witnessed the encounter spoke of how moved they had been by the compassion they had seen. Several visitors mentioned that they would remember this moment whenever they thought of the royal family and what they represented. Thomas Fletcher walked alongside James and Duchess as they returned to the stables. The head groom was quiet for most of the journey, processing what he had witnessed. Finally, he spoke about how proud he was of Duchess, how she had demonstrated that all their training in discipline and obedience had not diminished her natural compassion, but had refined it into something truly noble. Back at the stables, Duchess seemed different somehow. The mare moved with her usual grace and precision, but there was something deeper in her eyes now, a sense of satisfaction that came from having served in the truest sense of the word. James spent extra time grooming her that evening, quietly thanking her for teaching him something important about the nature of duty and service. Major Harrison filed his report about the day's events, but he struggled to find official language that could capture what had really happened. How do you document an act of pure compassion? How do you explain in military terms that sometimes breaking protocol serves a higher purpose? In the end, he wrote simply that Duchess had demonstrated the finest qualities of service and had brought honor to the regiment through her actions. The story of Margaret and Duchess spread far beyond the palace walls. News outlets around the world picked up the story, and it became a symbol of hope and kindness in difficult times. Videos of the encounter were viewed millions of times, with people commenting about how the horse's compassion had restored their faith in the goodness that exists in the world. Margaret's health continued to improve in the days following her encounter with Duchess. Her family attributed much of her renewed strength to the joy she had experienced that afternoon. She spoke constantly about the beautiful black mare who had shown her such kindness, and she carried photos of their meeting wherever she went. 3 months later, Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her loving family. Her granddaughter Emma spoke at the funeral about how her grandmother's encounter with Duchess had given the entire family a final memory of pure happiness. The Royal Guard horse had provided Margaret with something precious in her final months, the knowledge that her years of service had been seen and appreciated, delivered through an act of simple, genuine kindness. James continued his service with the Queen's Guard, but he was forever changed by that afternoon. He had learned that true discipline includes knowing when compassion should override protocol, and that the highest form of duty sometimes means allowing your heart to guide your actions. Duchess remained his partner, and their bond deepened through their shared understanding of what real service meant. The story became part of palace legend, told to new guards and staff as an example of the values they were meant to uphold. Duchess became something of a celebrity, but she remained the same noble, compassionate mare who had instinctively known that an elderly woman needed comfort and had provided it with grace and dignity. Years later, when visitors asked about the most memorable moments in palace history, staff members would often tell the story of the Royal Guard horse who broke protocol to show kindness to a former kitchen worker. It became a reminder that true nobility comes not from following rules blindly, but from recognizing when humanity and compassion should take precedence over everything else.